A week after the stormy night of sowing, the Sterling farm fell into an uncanny silence. Thomas Sterling, a 24-year-old with broad shoulders and hands calloused by the earth, stood on the weathered porch, gripping a mug of steaming coffee. The steam rose faintly in the crisp air of early April 1969. His eyes never left the western furrows where, not long ago, the storm had leveled everything. Under the pale sunlight filtering through gray clouds, the first corn shoots had broken through the hardened mud, rising in vibrant green. They were small and fragile, yet as resilient as the vows of honor Thomas had sworn to himself. He would not let the family farm fall into the hands of Agri-Corp, the giant corporation swallowing every small plot of land in Iowa. Thomas took a deep breath. The scent of damp earth and coffee reminded him of his father, who had passed away 2 years ago from lung cancer, which many whispered was caused by chemicals from neighboring fields. The Sterling farm had once been the pride of Story County, with over 200 acres of fertile soil for corn and soybeans. But now, debts piled high, the bank threatened foreclosure, and Agri-Corp, with its modified seeds and proprietary pesticides, lurked to buy it for a pittance. Thomas knew clearly, if he signed a contract with them, he would become a part of a giant system where farmers were merely screws in a mass production machine. No, he would rather starve than sell his soul to the devil. Billy, his 19-year-old brother, stepped out of the cowshed, wiping sweat from his brow with an old shirt sleeve. Thomas, those shoots to the west look strong. They survived the storm. Billy's voice rang with hope, but Thomas heard the hidden anxiety beneath it. Billy was about to be drafted. The Vietnam War was devouring thousands of young American men every month. The letter from the draft board had arrived, and without a valid reason, Billy would have to carry a rifle instead of a hoe. Thomas set his coffee mug down on the rotting wooden railing and patted his brother's shoulder. "We're going to win, Billy. Those green shoots are the proof. We planted the old seeds, natural seeds, not that damn Agri-Corp seed they want to force on us." The heavy wooden door of the Story County draft board creaked with a dry groan, like the moan of an old soul forced open. Thomas Sterling, a 24-year-old with a physique hardened from relentless days in the fields, entered without knocking. He brought with him the scent of the meadows after rain-damp earth, fresh grass mixed with the distinct smell of diesel clinging to his old denim clothes. Inside the office, the cold air from a modern air conditioner blew steadily, creating a strange contrast to the sweltering Iowa summer outside. But that cold could not soothe the tension thickening the narrow space, where the fates of young men like Billy were being decided by stamps and signatures. The small office, with its pale gray walls, was covered in war propaganda posters. "Uncle Sam needs you?" and images of heroic American soldiers in Vietnam. Seated behind a large wooden desk was the draft major, a middle-aged man named Harlan Brooks, with a weathered face, a military buzz cut, and eyes tired from witnessing too many youths swept into the war machine. Beside him sat not just stacks of thick files, but also a man in a wrinkle-free gray suit, sitting with his arms crossed in feigned confidence. That was Miller Legal Counsel for Agri-Corp, the giant agricultural corporation swallowing every small plot of land in the Midwest. His presence here was no coincidence. It was a silent message. The corporation wanted to wipe out the remnants of the Sterling family, starting with their human resources, turning Billy into a pawn in a larger game. Thomas stopped in the middle of the room, in no hurry to sit on the wooden chair opposite. He felt Miller's scrutinizing gaze, like a hawk observing its prey. His heart hammered, not from fear, but from the anger simmering in his chest. He had driven over an hour from the farm to get here, passing through lush green cornfields, and in his head there was only one goal: to save Billy from the draft letter hanging over him like a reaper's scythe. "You're late, Mr. Sterling," Miller spoke first, his voice smooth but mocking, the smile of a fox in a trap visible on his clean-shaven face. We were discussing your nephew's duty. Billy Sterling is a healthy 19-year-old with no health issues. The country needs him more than a few scrawny acres of corn on your tiny farm. Miller's words were like a knife, but Thomas did not flinch. He placed a stack of documents on the desk with a soft thud. The grease stains on the covers lum like war scars, contrasting completely with the polished, clean look of the lawyer. In that stack of papers was everything he had prepared. Tax filings proving the farm was the primary source of income, detailed planting maps with hand-drawn rows of corn, and certification from the Iowa Agricultural Society regarding Billy's essential role in agricultural labor. "The country needs food, Miller," Thomas growled, his voice low but powerful, like the Farmall engine rumbling in his head. "And the law clearly stipulates the right to a temporary deferment for essential agricultural labor. This is our tax filing proving the Sterling farm produces over 500 bushels of corn every season, enough to feed hundreds of families. This is the planting map. Billy is the only person besides me who can operate the machinery and care for the fields. And this is the certification from the society. They recognize us as one of the last family farms in Story County, still maintaining traditional farming methods." Miller used 2 fingers to pick up a paper, his face showing clear disgust, as if he were holding something filthy. "A farm buried in debt? A prehistoric tractor that's been broken for ages? You call that essential? Agri-Corp could replace your output in a single morning with modern machinery, genetically modified seeds, and efficient pesticides. Billy Sterling is essentially redundant labor, a boy who could be trained to hold a gun instead of a hoe. Don't waste our time, Sterling. Sign here, and Agri-Corp will take care of your bank debt." Major Brooks looked at Thomas, his gaze hesitating. He had served in Korea and knew the price of war, but pressure from above, and perhaps from Agri-Corp, tilted him toward the lawyer. He flipped through Billy's file, pages filled with numbers and signatures. "Mr. Sterling, the law is the law, but the war situation is tense. Vietnam needs men. If you can prove that Billy is truly irreplaceable." Thomas stepped closer to the desk, leaning his hands on the wood, the muscles in his arms bulging under his thin shirt. He looked straight into Miller's eyes, his own eyes burning like a wildfire. "Inspector Miller, you read the law, but you don't understand the land. Agri-Corp may have machines and modified seeds that leave the land barren after a few seasons, but you don't have keepers of the land. People like Billy and me, we don't just grow corn, we nurture the earth. If you push Billy away, I will countersue the corporation for illegal interference with agricultural personnel during peak harvest. I have records of you bribing the draft board in a neighboring county disguised donations to the officers' charity fund. Do you want this in the headlines? Agri-Corp manipulates military to swallow farmers' land. Sounds like a good headline, doesn't it?" The office fell into absolute silence. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded like the drafting of a sentence. Miller turned pale, his thin lips pressed tight, his hand gripping his pen so hard his knuckles turned white. He hadn't expected Thomas, a crude farmer, to play such a sharp legal move. Major Brooks looked from one to the other, then sighed heavily, slamming the stamp down on Billy's application. The clack sounded like a gunshot. "Temporary deferment, 2C, until the end of harvest," the officer said, his voice husky from tension. "You win this time, Sterling, but don't let me catch him in any bar during work hours. And remember, this is only temporary. War does not wait." Thomas snatched the paper, not glancing at Miller again. He turned and walked out, a surge of victory in his chest, though he knew this was only a temporary win. Agri-Corp would not stop. They would attack from another direction. But at least Billy was still with him, with the farm where land and law merged into one. On the way back to the farm, as the old Ford pickup rolled over the winding red dirt roads, Thomas let his mind drift back to the past. The wind from the open window rushed into the cabin, carrying the scent of ripening corn and damp earth, but in his head, images of his father Elias Sterling appeared clearer than ever. When he stopped the car in front of the old garage, with its rotting wooden planks and rusted tin roof, Thomas stepped down, his hand touching the rusted iron frame of the 1950 Farmall Super M. It wasn't just a machine. It was a legacy, the soul of the family. He remembered his father, Elias, a tall man with hands as rough as oak bark, but incredibly gentle when touching machinery. Elias had bought this Farmall on a sun-drenched autumn afternoon in 1950, when Thomas was a 5-year-old boy. It was the post-war era, when American farmers were trying to recover after World War II. Elias had saved for 2 years to buy it from a bankrupt neighbor, and that day, the tractor shining red in the afternoon sun was a symbol of new hope. "Look, Thomas," his father once said, his voice deep and proud as he placed the boy's small hand on the then brilliant red hood. "As long as this engine roars, the Sterling land belongs to us. It doesn't know how to lie. It only knows how to work. Just like you and me." Thomas remembered that feeling vividly, his father's warm hand, the smell of fresh engine oil mixed with the scent of hay. Elias had taught him everything about the Farmall, how to change the oil, adjust the carburetor, and listen to the engine to know if it was happy or sad. On scorching days in the fields, his father sat on the unpadded iron seat, sweat pouring down his back, but his smile was always bright when he saw the straight furrows. "The land is not something to be exploited, son," Elias often said. "It is a friend. And this Farmall is the bridge between us and the earth." Thomas recalled the hard years when the great agricultural crisis hit in the 1960s. Corn prices plummeted, debts mounted, and Agri-Corp began to appear like a ghost, buying up small farms at pittance prices. Many neighbors sold their land and moved to the city to work as factory workers, but Elias did not. He would rather go hungry to buy fuel for the Farmall than watch the land lie fallow. "They have money, but we have the land," he told Thomas on a rainy night. "And the land will not betray us if we do not betray it." The day his father died from the lung cancer many whispered was caused by chemicals from Agri-Corp's neighboring fields. The Farmall also stopped working, as if in a strange act of sympathy. It was 1967. Thomas was 22, and he had watched his father lying on his deathbed, his hand weakly stroking a photo of the tractor. "Promise me, you'll fix it," Elias whispered before closing his eyes. It is the heart of the farm. The Farmall had sat silent in the dark corner of the garage for 2 years, covered in dust and gnawed by rust, a symbol of decay. Now, as Thomas touched the cold metal, he felt his father's warmth. His fingers glided over the engine block, unscrewing bolts, replacing worn pistons, and in his head, memories flooded back like old film reels. He wasn't just fixing a machine. He was mending the dignity of his lineage. Every bolt he tightened was a promise to the past. We will not disappear. We will stand firm, like this Farmall. After many hours of work, under the light hanging in the garage, Thomas turned the key. The engine coughed a few times, then roared to life. The thump, thump echoed, and tears rolled down Thomas's cheeks. It was the heartbeat of his father, the farm, and hope. The real war began when darkness fell, and Agri-Corp's crop dusters left a lethal film of chemicals on the cornfield. It was glyphosate, a herbicide that people would later call Roundup sprayed over the Sterling boundary as a warning. The young corn leaves began to wither and curl under the late-night moonlight, like bodies writhing in pain. Thomas and Billy stood in the middle of the field under flickering flashlights. "Tom, will we be in time?" Billy asked, his voice trembling as he looked at the rows of corn he had cared for since sowing. He was 19. His eyes still held a hint of innocence, but the fear of war and Agri-Corp had forced him to mature quickly. "Don't ask, just do it." Thomas barked softly, not out of anger, but out of the urgency burning in his chest. He knew if they didn't act now, the crop would be lost. They hauled the old gasoline-powered water pump to the edge of the ditch, connecting hundreds of meters of rubber hose. The pump's engine crackled in the silent night, breaking the valley's stillness. Thomas and Billy each gripped one end of a nozzle, weaving through the rows of corn. Cool water from the underground spring sprayed out powerfully, washing away the toxic layer, trying to cling to the plant's life. Mud splattered onto their faces and eyes, sticking to their clothes. Thomas's back ached like 1,000 needles pricking him after hours of hunching over, but he did not stop. Billy's hands blistered from the friction of the heavy hose, blood seeping from scratches, but he didn't utter a word. He thought of the draft letter, of the friends who had left and never returned, and he knew this was his own war. By 2 a.m, exhaustion reached its peak. They sat down in the mud, leaning against each other to rest for 5 minutes, their heavy breathing mingling with the sounds of night insects. "Why do they hate us so much, Tom?" Billy whispered, his voice drifting between the croaking of frogs and the sound of water trickling from the ditch. Thomas looked up at the shimmering starry sky, the stars twinkling like fragile hopes. "They don't hate us, Billy. They hate our freedom. They want every acre to be on their Excel spreadsheets, every farmer to be their employee. But land isn't numbers. It's blood, it's soul. We wash these chemicals not just to save the corn, but to save ourselves." Thomas's words acted like a stimulant. They stood up again, continuing the work until the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon. The cornfield was now drenched. The corn leaves seemed to have regained their original green, shedding the lethal chemical coat. Thomas and Billy stood watching, exhausted but satisfied. This wasn't just a night of labor. It was the night they fought for freedom, for the land, and for each other. On the 40th floor of the Agri-Corp building in downtown Des Moines, the atmosphere was entirely different from the muddy fields of Iowa. This was a world of glass and steel, of glowing computer screens and expensive suits. The regional director, a man named Vance, about 50 years old, with silver hair and eyes as cold as a knife, sat in a large meeting room, staring at a satellite report on a giant screen. The image of the sterling field appeared clearly, with rows of corn still lush green after the chemical attack. "Explain, Miller," Vance said, his voice terrifyingly calm, not looking directly at the lawyer standing in the corner. Miller, still in his gray suit but now wrinkled with sweat, swallowed hard. "They kept the boy, sir. Thomas Sterling used a sharp legal move threatening to sue us for interfering with the draft. And according to reports from the flight crew, the Sterlings used high-capacity pumps to wash away the herbicide overnight. The damage rate is only about 5%. They saved the crop." Vance rotated his chair, his narrow eyes squinting under gold-rimmed glasses. "Meaning they still have harvest potential? And they still have that scrap heap from 1950? That Farmall? I heard. They fixed it," Miller stammered, gripping his file as if for support. Vance slammed his hand down on the glass table, causing the ceramic coffee cup to jump and spill. "We don't just buy land, Miller. We buy despair. If an old farmer and a kid can resist us, other farms will look at that. They will think they can win too. Agri-Corp cannot let that happen. We've invested millions in modified seeds, in pesticides, all to control the market." Vance stood up, walking to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the bustling city below. The skyscrapers sparkled in the sun, but in his mind, only the image of the sterling field remained like a stain. "Increase the pressure on the bank. I want all the Sterling's debts paid immediately after harvest. Send more representatives to convince their neighbors to sell. And if necessary, prepare for Phase 2, economic sabotage. If they want to fight with muscle, we will crush them with the power of money." Miller nodded, but in his heart, he knew Thomas Sterling was not a man easily subdued. This war would continue. Back at the farm, under the golden afternoon sun, Thomas pressed the throttle of the 1950 Farmall. The machine shuddered, then lifted the plow off the ground. The thump, thump, thump was no longer just the sound of a machine. It was the anthem of victory echoing through the valley, drowning out the wind and the birdsong. Billy stood nearby, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, watching his uncle drive, Old Red, into the field. He smiled, feeling the true strength of family for the first time. Agri-Corp had money, lawyers, and planes. But the Sterlings had land, memories that could not rust, and a tractor resurrected from the ashes. The real war was just beginning, but they were ready. In August 1969, when the corn had entered its milk stage and stood taller than a head, Thomas decided to do something crazy. He heard on the radio about a massive music festival in New York, Woodstock, 3 days of peace and music. It wasn't just music. It was a manifesto of a younger generation against the war, against the system. Thomas felt a strange urge, as if that festival was a call specifically meant for people like him. Farmers fighting to hold onto their land and their souls. "Billy, we're going," Thomas said one evening as the two brothers sat on the porch watching a crimson sunset. "We need to see that we aren't alone. There are millions out there fighting for freedom, just as we fight for this land." Billy hesitated, his eyes wandering over the cornfield swaying in the wind. "But what about the field? The corn is almost ripe, and if a storm hits, we'll only be gone for a few days," Thomas persuaded, his voice deep and full of hope. "This is your chance to see a world bigger than Iowa. And maybe we'll find something that changes our lives forever." They drove the old Ford pickup, packed with bread, water, and a few changes of clothes. The journey stretched over 1,000 miles, through the endless plains of the Midwest, through major cities like Chicago and Cleveland. On the radio, they heard Joan Baez singing anti-war folk songs, and news of Apollo 11's successful moon landing on July 20th. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Thomas drove, Billy dozed in the passenger seat, and in Thomas's heart, anxieties about the farm, Agri-Corp, and Billy's future surged like an undertow. When they arrived in Bethel, New York, Highway 17B had turned into a massive parking lot. Hundreds of thousands of people, hippies with tangled long hair, bell-bottom jeans, and tie-dye shirts in rainbow colors, huddled together, laughing and chanting peace slogans. Thomas, in his frayed denim shirt and jeans caked with mud from the Iowa fields, looked as out of place as a farmer lost in an urban jungle. Billy was quickly captivated by the faint scent of marijuana, the echo of guitars from afar, and the uninhibited freedom of the youthful crowd. They left the truck by the roadside and walked miles to Max Yasker's field. The air was saturated with music. Richie Havens opened with Freedom, his raspy voice echoing like a wake-up call. Santana followed with fierce Latin rhythms, Janis Joplin with her soulful vocals, and The Who with explosive energy. When a torrential rain poured down on Saturday afternoon, Max Yasker's vast dairy farm turned into a giant mud pit. People slipped and fell, laughed, and shared food and water. Mud splattered onto clothes, but no one complained. This was the mud of solidarity, not the mud of despair like in Iowa. It was in that very rain, amidst the distant music of the Grateful Dead and the echoing laughter of the crowd, that Thomas met her, the woman who would become his future partner, in a romantic and profound way that only destiny could weave. Thomas was wandering alone along the edge of the field, the heavy rain soaking him to the bone. His denim shirt clung to his tanned skin, and rainwater streamed down his weathered face, a face accustomed to the dust, wind, and scorching sun of the Midwest. He stopped by a small fire, carefully shielded under a large tarp, the flickering flames reflecting on the raindrops like thousands of falling stars. Billy had run off somewhere with new friends, leaving Thomas with a deep loneliness he had never admitted, the loneliness of a 24-year-old man who carried an entire farm on his shoulders. and had never known true love. Suddenly, through the white veil of rain, a slender figure appeared as if from a dream. The girl walked slowly, her long brown hair drenching wet, strands clinging to her cheeks like soft brushstrokes. Her tie-dye dress clung to her body, soaked by the rain, revealing a gentle yet strong silhouette. She slipped on the slick mud, her body tilting, and by his deepest instinct, Thomas lunged forward, wrapping his arms around her waist to steady her. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. His calloused hands touched her soft skin, cold from the rain but strangely burning. She looked up, her eyes a deep blue as the Iowa sky after a storm, looking straight into his. In those eyes, Thomas saw an ocean of emotion, surprise, warmth, and a lingering sadness, much like the one he carried from his threatened fields. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice as light as a breeze, yet echoing in his heart more powerfully than any music from the stage. "The rain here, it's as if heaven and earth are washing away all the pain." Thomas didn't let go immediately. He felt her heart beating fast under the wet fabric, merging with his own. I'm used to rain and mud," he replied, his voice husky with an emotion he had never felt. Thomas Sterling, from Iowa, a farmer lost in the middle of this Woodstock. She smiled, a smile as radiant as morning sun breaking through clouds, and placed her hand over his, not pulling away. "I'm Emily Hayes, from Pennsylvania." Her name rang like a gentle melody, and Thomas repeated it in his heart, as if afraid to forget. They found shelter together under the large tarp, sitting close to avoid the rain. Emily took a warm, home-baked loaf of bread from her backpack, tearing half to give to him. Their fingers touched longer than necessary, and this time, no one withdrew. "Eat," she said softly. "You look like you're carrying the whole world on your shoulders." Thomas took a bite, the smell of flour blending with the scent of rain and damp earth, suddenly making him choke up. He told her about the farm, about Agri-Corp, about the sleepless nights washing off chemicals, about the fear of losing everything. For the first time, he spoke without hiding his pain, the pain of a young man who had lost his father, was about to lose his brother to war, and feared losing the land that was his very flesh and blood. Emily listened, her eyes glistening with moisture. It was unclear if it was rain or tears. She placed her hand on his arm, stroking it gently. "You aren't alone anymore, Thomas. Here, among hundreds of thousands, I found you. Maybe destiny led me through this rain to meet you." As the rain tapered off, a weak twilight emerged, dyeing the muddy field in red. Emily stood up, pulling Thomas's hand. "Come with me. Let the rain wash away all the worries." They ran into the middle of the field, hand in hand, laughing amidst the music of Sly and the Family Stone. Emily slipped, falling into Thomas's arms. He held her tight, feeling her breath against his neck, warm and sweet. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wished, but she didn't. Their lips met, a first kiss deep and intense, carrying the taste of fresh rain, of Mother Earth, of freedom, and of a budding love. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a silent promise between two kindred souls. Thomas felt his heart, a heart hardened by land and responsibility, melt away. He held her closer, whispering in her ear, You make me want to live all over again." For the remaining days of the festival, they never left each other. They lay together under the starry sky, listening to Joe Cocker sing, "With a little help from my friends," hands tightly entwined. Emily spoke of her dream of an organic farm, of children running through clean fields, and Thomas saw his future clearly, with Emily on the Sterling land. When they met Max Yasker, he looked at them with a kind smile. Planting an idea is more important than planting grass for cows. And you two young people have planted the most beautiful seed, love, amidst the storm and rain. The climax came at dawn on Monday, when Jimi Hendrix played his distorted national anthem. Thomas stood behind Emily, his arms around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder, which smelled of rain and wildflowers. The guitar echoed like a prophecy of freedom, of immortal love. Emily turned her head, whispering through the music, "This is our anthem, Thomas. You and me, forever." As the festival ended, Emily gave Thomas a handmade wooden bead necklace, placing it around his neck with trembling fingers. "To remember me, to remember the rain that brought me to you. I will come to Iowa. We belong together, as the land belongs to the seed, as the rain belongs to the field." Thomas kissed her one last time, deep and long, tears mingling with smiles. He left Bethel with a heart overflowing with emotions he had never known. Intense love, burning hope, and a belief that no matter how strong Agri-Corp was, no matter how brutal the war, he had found the greatest reason to fight Emily, the woman who had turned the Woodstock rain into the eternal rain of love in his life. Returning to Iowa after the long journey, Billy was no longer the frightened teenager. He had seen hundreds of thousands of people chanting peace, had heard Hendrix transform the national anthem into an anti-war hymn. "I won't go to the army if I don't have to," Billy said. "But if I must, I will fight for freedom right here on this land." In September, news of Apollo 11 was still hot. Humanity had conquered the moon. But in Iowa, an unexpected superstorm swept through. The mass chemical farms at Agri-Corp were heavily devastated, soil depleted, roots shallow, corn leveled. But the sterling corn, grown from old seeds, meticulously cared for, with roots deep in hardship, stood firm, losing only a few rows on the edges. Thomas and Billy worked without pause to save the harvest. The red Farmall pulled trailers of sturdy corn back to the barn. October arrived, and the fields were dyed in the color of honey gold. The final load of corn paid off the bank debt in full. The bank representative, Mr. Harlan, who, coincidentally, was a henchman for Agri-Corp, met Thomas at the office again, this time with a hint of reluctant respect. "Mr. Sterling, you are the most stubborn person I've ever met." Thomas smiled, watching Billy radiant on the Farmall driver's seat outside the window. "I'm not stubborn. I'm just a farmer who never gives up on his seeds." As the red Farmall rolled home under a crimson sunset, Thomas looked up at the sky. Mankind had conquered the moon, but he knew the greatest victory of humanity lay in the strength of Entrunk, individual when they decide to protect what they love most, right on the soil beneath their feet. The green shoots of that year were not just corn. They were symbols of freedom, of dignity, of the anthem that Thomas and Billy had sung along with Hendrix. Freedom for the land, for the people, for the future.